All right, good evening. Thank you all for being here for this discussion and the public hearing on a proposal to consolidate city elections. My name's Chris Meyer. I'm the city clerk, so one of my responsibilities is conducting elections for the city. I've been doing this since 1985, so I've been around for a while. The council members will be here later and their staff. They aren't here at the moment, so we'll kick it off. Just a reminder, I think all of you have already turned in cards if you want to speak and get your comments, which we will do at the end of the presentation, which will last about 15 or 20 minutes. So I'll go through the presentation that attempts to explain what the council's considering, some of the challenges and some of the benefits to each of them, and then we'll take your comments or answer any questions that you have. So thank you again for being here and being interested in providing your input. So we're here to talk about election consolidation, or the potential for that. The City Council is considering consolidating city elections to the fall of even years to hold them in conjunction with the state elections in the fall of even years. The city currently conducts its own elections in the fall of odd years. However, for a variety of reasons around the country, this is not just a local phenomenon, not just a Phoenix phenomenon, turnout in local elections for school districts and cities and towns tends to be much lower than in elections for governor and president and some of the state issues. So the council is looking at the voter participation and considering consolidating the elections to see if it might boost participation in city elections. We'll be looking at some voter registration data and numbers, and particularly in the November general election, the turnout in the state elections in the fall of even years is higher than what the city typically gets in its elections in the fall of even years. So we will look at that, but that's the reason why we're here and what's being considered. First, a little background on city elections. The city of Phoenix is the second largest election jurisdiction in the state, behind, of course, Maricopa County. So we are actually bigger than Pima County and all the rest of the counties. And we conduct our elections ourselves, independently of the county. The county provides the voter registration rolls because by statute, the recorder has to maintain those rolls, and then we conduct the election and do all of the other parts of it. City elections, because they're nonpartisan, have been separate from the state elections, as far as we can tell, all the way back to incorporation in 1881. The city has done them separately. Most elections for cities and towns were in the spring, but in 1949, the city moved from the spring to the fall of odd years, which is where our elections currently are. So that was in 1949. The city has 713,000 registered voters. 70% of those are on the permanent early voting list. And so that means that 70% of the registered voters, which is about 500,000, receive a ballot by mail automatically for all city elections. 95% of the ballots cast in city elections, so of the people who vote, 95% of those votes are typically cast by mail. So that is the vast majority. We operate voting centers, but they represent about 5% of the ballots cast. The city has been a leader historically around the state in innovations in elections. We were one of the first to consolidate precincts back in 1987 to start that. We implemented the first permanent early voting list in 1997. The city had one. The state adopted a permanent early voting list in 2007, and the two lists were merged back in 2007, and now there's one for all elections. The city was also the first to develop and use voting centers, and that was implemented in 2011. And I forgot to click that. Sorry. Okay. There are three options being considered, and we'll go through each one of those just to explain what they are. And I want to say just up front, there are three options being looked at. There are pros and cons to each of the three alternatives. There is not one win-win-win for everybody in any of these proposals, and that's one reason we're out trying to get some comment and feedback and impact on which ones voters prefer. So I'll quickly run through what the three options are, just explain them, then we'll go through each one to look at the logistics about what's the differences between them and how they be conducted. And then we'll go back through them one at a time and kind of talk about some of the differences or the advantages or challenges to each of them. And then we'll take any questions anybody has. So the three options are, one is to maintain the current August-November election cycle that the city is currently on. The city conducts the elections, and the elections are in August and November of odd years. The second option is to consolidate with the state primary and general elections and conduct the elections in August and November of even years. So that would be putting the City of Phoenix candidate races and propositions on the ballot for the county at the primary election in August and the general election in November. The third option, which we'll talk about how we got to this third option, but that is to hold the first election for candidates and propositions in November of the even year, so on the state general election ballot. And then if a runoff election is required, to hold that runoff election in March of the following year. Can you guys hear me? Well, they won't be able to hear me. Do I need to stop there?
As long as you project your voice, I can still hear you.
Okay. Okay, sorry. The consolidation, if the city is going to do this, the consolidation does require several charter amendments to change the date of our election and when the terms begin and those kinds of things for conducting the election. So the council is considering referring those measures to voters to be on the ballot this fall, which would then make it possible for the city's scheduled election for mayor and council in 2019 to be moved to the fall of 2020 and be on the state primary general election ballot. But in order to do that, the election would have to be held this fall because candidates start circulating petitions and they'll have to file them next spring for the August election next year. Okay, now we'll run through the three options and they'll all be put up just so you can kind of compare the differences. First of all, for the current cycle, what Phoenix does in odd years. We conduct the elections, as I said, in August and November of odd years. The city uses the permanent early voting list for early voting. All of the voters on the permanent early voting list, regardless of their party affiliation, receive a ballot automatically for city elections. It's not a partisan election. Everybody gets the same ballot regardless of party. So everybody automatically gets a ballot now for the city elections. Okay, we'll try this one. Is that better? For voting at the polls, the city uses voting centers. So any voter can go to any of the 27 to 30 locations that we have open, and you can go on any of 3 days. We open them on Saturday, Monday, and Tuesday. So voters have flexibility to go anywhere they want, not to one designated site, and they can go on 3 days. The city uses a general runoff model. So the August election is the general election. That's when the propositions appear on the ballot for city elections. And we only have an election in November if a candidate does not receive a majority of the votes cast in the first election. So we always have the August election, but we don't always have the November election. And then I'm going to give you some cost data on the three methods for comparison. These costs are based on a citywide election. Obviously, if the election is only in 1 or 2 districts, it doesn't cost this much. The cost is less. But just for comparison, we'll consider citywide elections. The cost for the city to conduct a voting center election, the way we do it now, is about $1 million. Most of that cost is actually printing and mailing of all of the ballots and the materials. Okay, the second option that we're looking at is August and November of even years. The county would conduct the city elections at that time. The county does use the permanent early voting list. However, for the August primary election, independent voters do not automatically get a ballot. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But because they're registered as part of a party, they have to tell the election official, the county recorder, what ballot they want to receive because they're eligible to receive any of the party ballots. Whereas a Republican or Democrat just gets that party, independents can pick, and the recorder doesn't know what ballot to send them unless they notify the county which one. Now for November, that problem doesn't exist. That's unique to the August election because it's a partisan primary election. The November general election, again, all of the voters on the permanent early voting list do receive a ballot automatically because everybody gets the same ballot. The cost for the county to conduct election, if we consolidate with the county, the cost would be about $500,000, and that it's lower because The state, the county, and the other jurisdictions on that ballot all share the cost. But that only happens in the state primary and general elections in the fall of even years. So as we'll see, the county cost to conduct elections at other times is higher. Okay, the third option is the November-March option. And in this case, the county would conduct the election in November because they're already having the state general election. So the city items would be placed on the county ballot in November. But if there were a runoff election required in March, the city would conduct that election using our voting center model. Again, the permanent early voting list is used in November, and everybody, including the independents, gets the ballot because it's all the same ballot. It's not a partisan primary election. And the turnout in the November elections is considerably higher than other elections. That's the basis for the November option, and we'll look at the turnout numbers in a minute. The county uses polling places both for the August election and the November election. So voters were required to go to one designated polling place, the one for their precinct. They couldn't do like they do with voting centers and go to any one of them that was close to school or work or home or wherever. And then in the March election in the spring would be voting centers again. So again, voters would have more flexibility to go to any locations in the spring. The November election, with the county conducting it, would be the same cost as the August, about $500,000. And then the city conducting the runoff in March would be the usual city cost at about $1 million. One of the reasons I'll add here for the council considering having the city continue to conduct those elections is that the cost for that runoff and any other special election that we would conduct would be about $1 million. If we contracted with the county to conduct those elections, the cost would be about $2 million. So the money that we save consolidating to August on the state general election dates, we would be more than offset by the higher cost of the county conducting a special election. Okay, the couple of things about the city, some of the benefits or challenges. As I said, city elections were separate because they were nonpartisan. So doing our elections separately as we do now maintains the separation between the nonpartisan elections the city conducts and the partisan elections for the state primary and general election. Another consideration is that the amount of information and attention that the media would be able to give and that voters would be able to focus on local issues, there's not another election going on when the city conducts it, so everybody can focus on those matters. When the county is conducting the state elections, you've got all of the state and federal candidates, the president, the governor, propositions, school districts, judges, all the state propositions. All of those items would be drawing attention from the media and ads and the voters. So question about how much information would be available to the voters for our elections on the county ballot. Also, as I mentioned, the independent issue, all of the independent voters on the permanent early voting list in Phoenix, all 500,000 of them, automatically get a ballot when we conduct the election. However, only about 1/3 of those voters that get the ballot actually vote and return the ballot for city elections. So they get the ballot in the mail, but they don't vote it and return it. Again, we're using voting centers, so there's convenience. I mentioned the general election, that we do a general and a runoff. So about only 40% of the time does the city have to have a November election. So having our general runoff cycle avoids the cost of 2 elections. 70% of the offices get decided, and 60% of the elections are determined without a runoff. So we only pay for an election in August, and we don't have to pay for doing an election in November. Another factor that relates to the others on the city ballot, since we only have the mayor and council members, about 90% of the space on the ballot is available for propositions. That allows us to put more measures on a ballot if the council wants to refer them. It also allows us to put more descriptive language about the measures on the ballot. We'll talk about the differences to the county in just a second. For the August and November election, again, the August election is a partisan primary election. The point of that election is for the parties to elect or nominate what candidates are going to move forward to the general and run in the general against the other parties for the voters to select. So independent voters do not receive a ballot automatically for that ballot. And I'll show you some data in a second and explain that a little more. Again, the county uses polling places, so voters have to go to that one designated place. The cost for those elections would be $500,000. One note on the August election as well, there is less ballot space on that ballot than there is on the city, but there's more than there is in November. The county estimates that there would be room for about 4 to 6 ballot measures on the ballot in August if the city were on that measure. So we could get about 4 to 6. And there would be a little bit more text, there would be more text available for that than in November, but they don't have as much room for text as what the city can put on in their elections in the odd numbered years. Okay, now for the independent issue. You can see that in the primary election in August 2016 and August 2014, there were about 400,000 independent voters in the county on the permanent early voting list that were sent a postcard about the upcoming election. And on that postcard, they were given the option to select a Republican Party ballot, a Democratic Party ballot, a Libertarian ballot, or a nonpartisan city ballot only. So it would just have those races. However, as you look at the numbers, only in 2016, only 15% of the independent voters that got that notice, 62,000, actually returned it to receive a ballot by mail. And in 2014, only about 19% of those voters actually returned that and got the ballot. So they need to notify the county which ballot, and less than 20% of those voters actually do that. Whereas on the last line there, you see the city, there's almost 150,000 independent voters on the permanent early voting list in Phoenix, and all 148,000 got their ballots automatically by mail. But for full disclosure, we checked the numbers on how many of those voters actually returned the ballot, and it's only about 20 to 25%. So we mailed out to 100%, but only 20 to 25% voted, which is just a little bit higher than what is participating in the county primary at 15 to 20%. One of the reasons this is being considered is the turnout. So here's a comparison of turnout for Phoenix voters. This shows how many Phoenix voters voted in the city election in 2011 and then the state primary election in 2012. And you see that the city was about 22%, and in the primary election for the state it was about 25%. The next year, in 13 and 14 cycles, it was exactly the same. And then in 2015 and 2016, the turnout for the city was about 21%, and for the county it was almost 24%. So there's not much different in turnout to consolidate to the August primary election, which is what, and because of the concern for the independent voters not automatically receiving the ballot, the turnout and that independent factor is what led the council to consider the third option, which is the November and March consolidation. So in this option, as we said, the county would conduct the city election in November, and if a runoff would be required, the city would conduct the election in March for the runoff. This is a unique model. There are no other jurisdictions in the state of Arizona that are conducting their first election in November and having their runoff election in March. That would result in a campaign for the runoff for that district or citywide, depending on the case, from November until March. And for those of you who are enthralled with all of the political signs, the law would allow those signs to remain up from November until the election in March. One of the other concerns or considerations with the November ballot option, as we talked about, if it was this runoff, is that there is not much space on that county ballot in November. It is full. You think about that double-sided ballot with the judges and all the state measures and school districts, and Corp Commission, and all of the offices. The county predicts and says that usually there's room for maybe 2 to 4 ballot measures on the ballot if the city wanted to put those measures on. That doesn't sound quite so bad, except that what you're talking about for the measure is a 50-word or less statement that says, shall the proposition such and such to do this be adopted. That's it. That's all the description. Everything else would have to come from the publicity pamphlet or the other materials. There's also concerns or thoughts that what would happen with the turnout. We may get higher in turnout in November, but then we have a runoff election. What's the turnout going to be for that runoff election in March? Because the turnout in the spring elections is typically even lower than what we get in the November elections in odd years. Again, the cost will be $500,000 for the county in November and then $1 million for the city. To look at turnout, this displays the reason it's being considered. If you look at the 2011 runoff election in the city of Phoenix, turnout was about 29%. This was a contested mayor's race. This was the Gullett and Stanton election, and we had 29% turnout. The following year was the presidential election, and the turnout was almost 75% of Phoenix voters participating. The following, in 2013, was the city election that was just for council districts 4 and 8, so a runoff in only 2 of the 4 even districts. We had 23% turnout. The governor election the following year had a turnout of 43%. So you'll notice there is a difference of 30% even between the presidential elections and the state elections for state offices and governor in the off-cycle elections. You'll notice in 2015 there was no city runoff listed. Everyone got elected in 2015 in the first election, so there was no election in November. So we didn't have anything to compare. 2016 with the presidential election, the last time was almost 71% of Phoenix voters turned out to vote in that election. So as I mentioned, there's several charter amendments that be required, and the council's considering referring those to voters in the fall. That actually will be on the agenda at the April 18th formal agenda for the council to consider referring those items to the ballot in August of 2018. So that concludes the presentation and the information we have. I'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And I'll call the speakers that turned in cards. If anyone else wants to speak, we'd request that you turn in a card so we have your information. And then I'll just go ahead and call the cards. And you can come up to this microphone here so that we can capture it on the video and stream. So with that, I'll go ahead and call the cards. And if there's other questions, we'll ask them after that. So do you need this microphone? Okay. First one is Kevin Loera. Loera?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Kevin Loera. I'm a defender of democracy, and I'm here representing Lucha Living United for Change in Arizona. We advocate and protect immigrants, and we fight for social and economic justice on many fronts. But today, this is, in the bigger picture, this is about our democracy and preserving our elections and the rights of voters. So I do have a few points to make. I've made them before, but I've been able to solidify them a little better. I don't see any council members here, which is a little unfortunate, but I am thankful that the City of Phoenix is having this time for public comment. Thank you to the Maryvale Community Center. I grew up playing basketball here, so I'm excited to be back after many years. So, points in opposition, I will say I strongly oppose this. Not only do I oppose this, I strongly oppose this. Number one, we learned a hard lesson in the 2018 primaries. I know some of you remember this, about 2 years ago. What did we learn? That cutting down on resources, such as cutting costs for the elections, as highlighted in the presentation, and consolidation polling locations, this makes way for disaster and for voter suppression. We should never cut down costs to so-called save money or cut the budget for elections. Why? Because voting is a vital pillar of our democracy. So we should be expanding it and making it more transparent, not be consolidating and cutting the process apart. Point two, this proposal, quite frankly, in my eyes, is a no-brainer. Everyone concerned about clean, transparent, and open elections needs to oppose this. There is no compelling justification to attempt to combine local city elections with the magnitude of statewide and federal elections. Point three, these proposed plans that we just learned about will disproportionately disenfranchise independent voters and thus will disenfranchise Latino voters who actually comprise 40% of these independent voters. Point number four, consolidating these elections is actually consolidating power to hold these very elections. The current council, establishment, and special interests in our government would benefit from this proposal if passed, as future elections would be entrenched and hidden amongst state primary and general elections. They would be hidden amongst the millions of dollars in negative ads and the hundreds of thousands spent on candidates from special interests, oftentimes from outside the city and oftentimes outside our state of Arizona. If we consolidate elections, then our local elections are vulnerable to security breaches, such as hacking and manipulations, as we have seen this past 2 years. Our nation's most recent Secretary of State, our Secretary of State of the United States, along with the intelligence community, have stated that foreign governments will indeed be attempting to hack our upcoming elections. It does not make sense to bunch our sacred local election process with larger election systems that can be intruded and more easily manipulated if they're all on the same database. Second to last point, quite frankly, in my eyes, these proposals are a shame by the City of Phoenix Council. We need to be expanding elections and access to them, along with increasing funding and resources for elections, not consolidating and shrinking them. My final point, this is clearly modern voter suppression. Such claims about increasing voter turnout are faulty and generic. The presentation, proposal, and studies don't show sufficient evidence that combining elections increases voter turnout for the sake of local candidates. If we are serious about increasing voter turnout, then let's leave our city elections the way they are. City and other local elections need their own time, election cycle, their own attention, so that voters can tune in, get to know the candidates, ask questions, be able to attend public hearings such as this one, which sadly enough, there are not enough people here, and be able to cast an informed vote without the distraction and momentum of highly politicized state and general elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Next card I have is Elizabeth Thorley.
So I testify here today on behalf of Arizona AFL-CIO, Living United for Change in Arizona, and based on my own convictions. Speaking in front of you is a registered independent voter, small business owner, and microbiology student hoping to set up a career here. After looking at the statistics of how this would affect Phoenix, how it would affect different communities, how it can affect constituencies within communities, it's rather frightening. I'm here to testify against election consolidation based on how it disproportionately hurts independent voters and members of ethnic minorities who have faced many legal persecutions, many found to be unconstitutional and contempt of court in this state in the last decade. So, starting with looking at how this affects independent voters. So, when voters have to request a ballot, many times people are too busy living their own lives. They have things to worry about, like making enough money to barely make ends meet, taking care of their kids, taking care of other life responsibilities. By making sure that everybody gets a ballot, the City of Phoenix is able to better distribute power among its constituents. Though some may not return a ballot, it still gives that percentage of people an opportunity. In a city of millions, that's thousands of votes that could swing one way or another. On another instance, looking at this city, we're the 5th largest city in the country and we're growing. We have the opportunity to face so many issues that are currently haunting the city based on its infrastructure, based on different social and economic issues, but also based on the potential there. We may face a high rate of child poverty in this nation. We may have far to come compared to other metropolis cities in the country, but most of all, we have the chance to keep on building. We have the chance to progress. This is a new frontier for conquering those issues, for coming up with new economic models, for paving the way in things like research and economy, because everything is so new. By allowing this city's leadership to become like our legislature, to become like the rest of the country, we're subjecting it to the same division and the same mess. Giving independent voters and those whose voices are normally silenced gives this city the opportunity to have an independent voice and to grow itself, to conquer its issues and to keep building, instead of just stagnating as we see right now. There's a lot of fighting that comes in the structure of partisan elections. It often leads to much gridlock. it isn't very productive when it comes to passing legislation that constituents actually want. Providing people with the opportunity to make their own decisions and to get their ballot without having to request in advance based on their busy lifestyles allows Phoenix to keep growing and to progress beyond other cities that are close to its size. Another point, just in general, I have to say that, looking at election consolidation, elections should be one of the last foci for budget cuts on a city's agenda. Even though excessive spending or spending on quite unnecessary materials shouldn't be a priority, then looking at all the different places where budget can be affected, elections decide the leadership of the city, they decide the city's future. For a city to slack on that shows a low priority toward the wants of constituents, because elections are the chance for constituents to choose how a city will solve its own problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Roy Vissette? Hello?
Listen, Chris. So my main question is, do you guys have a plan for actually educating our voters about the changes if the changes do occur?
Question is, do we have a plan for educating voters if this goes through and we're going to be consolidating elections? We have talked about several things and normal things we do. I'm sure that if this happens, there will be more efforts discussed, and we look at what else we would do if it happens. But yes, we historically, the city has sent out postcards to notify voters of a change. All of the voters would be getting the notices that are sent out to the preliminary voting list. We have discussed, if we consolidated to August, for example, that the city would mail an additional card, particularly to the independents, about notifying them about the challenge and the issue and reminding them of the need to request a ballot, or they wouldn't be able to vote in the city elections. And then the publicity pamphlet and all the other materials that go out. So we have part of it. There would be more if this happens.
Okay, so it'd be more than just mailing a letter, right? Because I get letters all the time, and personally here in Phoenix, I was getting a birthday card, and it actually got lost in the mailing system. Didn't get it until actually 3 months later. So I mean, that's a big concern for me because of the fact that even organizing our communities, my experience has been, it takes a lot more than just mailing a card to really get our folks to go out to vote. Not only that, I mean, it's unfortunate that our elected officials couldn't be here today so they could go ahead and speak for themselves, but it is what it is. One of the other things that concerns me is, how did you guys get the word out for this? Because I mean, it seems like there's not that many individuals here. I mean, you could go to any different rally that other individuals have done, and you could see hundreds, thousands, 30, 40 people, but here you see about not that many concerned citizens.
The notice that was provided for these hearings was the same as what was done for the budget hearings. The advertisements, the flyers, the media outreach, all of the things that were done to publicize the voting hearings, or the budget hearings, were also done about the consolidated elections.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's all for my questions, but again, Lucha actually has over 600 page due members, so we're here and advocating for them, and we oppose the consolidation of elections. So thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask to verify your position, but I thought that's what it was. Okay, and then I have one more card from Stephanie Maldonado, who says she's also opposed but doesn't wish to speak. Is that correct? You want to speak? Okay. And we have one more then. So Stephanie Maldonado.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Stephanie Maldonado, and I'm here representing Arizona Center for Empowerment. We are a community organization that goes out into the community and ensures that our communities are registered to vote. Along with our coalition, One Arizona, our goal is to register 200,000 new voters or update voters registration here in the state of Arizona. A lot of the work that we do is going out into our communities, nonpartisanly talking to voters about why it's so important that they are registered to vote, updating their voter registrations, and ensuring that they are in the Pebble, and communicating the issues that are happening in our community and why it's so important to vote. I think it's really interesting. I was online watching the previous hearing, meeting that happened up in the North Phoenix area, and I did see that all of our city council members, most of them were present. This community represents, Maryvale is the heart of the Latino, Brown, Black communities. And to see that our city council members are not present in this community is really alarming, because this is a disproportionately Latino, low-income community that has a lot of individuals who are working 2-3 jobs to support their families, and ensuring that our community's voices are heard is alarming to me as someone that goes out into the community and registers community, letting them know about the issues and also ensuring them that their votes will be heard. We cannot tell who they can vote for. We cannot tell them what party to vote for. And the fact that our city council members are considering changing, even like the thought of changing these elections on making it a partisan ballot is actually really, really alarming to me, because if it is a nonpartisan city council, why would you consider putting this on having to make the choice of getting either whichever ballot you need? So as someone who works in the nonpartisan world and making sure democracy runs the way that we claim it should run, we need to ensure that our voters' voices are being heard, and we need to ensure that the families and the communities that are disproportionately being represented, because the fact that our council members are not present just kind of makes a statement to the folks who are arriving. Well, we have one. Knowing that they care about the issues and their voices are actually being heard. Thank you.
Thank you. Miriam Mendez, do you wish to speak? Okay, so you submitted a card that says you're opposed to the consolidation. Thank you. Okay, next card, Vanya Maryvale. Vanya, I saw you. There you are. Did you wish to speak or just put in the card?
Briefly.
Sure.
I just wanted to echo the comments that are being made and just state that this is another form of voter suppression for our communities, especially when you're limiting access to the ability for many communities to vote. As was previously mentioned, we have many families who work multiple jobs, be it by mail or, I love that the city in previous years was able to create more voting places. There was more of an awareness of opportunities to vote, and this kind of contradicts all of the work that was done. So I just encourage you, council members, to listen to the communities who are most impacted by this potential change. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanya. Good to see you. Okay, that's all the cards I have. Does anyone else have any questions or want to make any comments on the election consolidation? Okay, not seeing any. We'll close this hearing, and then the budget hearing will begin in a few minutes. I'll be happy to answer any other questions that anybody has that they didn't want to ask, maybe in front of everybody. Councilman Valenzuela, I saw that you're here. Did you want to rep this?
Thank you, Chris. I really want to thank Chris Meyer. We're fortunate, the city's fortunate to have our city clerk, who is the most accessible clerk as far as I'm concerned. Well, maybe because he's our clerk, but he's always accessible to not just the elected officials, but the public. When he says that he's available to answer any questions, he really is. And I'm glad that you're all here to talk about this particular issue, because this is an important issue for us. We're talking about consolidating elections, and I will say that I'm on record over and over and over in stating that it's a bad idea for the city of Phoenix to move in a direction to become a partisan city. When we are consolidating elections, we are reducing the opportunities to actually vote in this city. Today, in a city election, you can vote the Saturday prior to the Tuesday election. You can vote Monday prior to the Tuesday election. or you can vote on Tuesday. You can vote in a universal polling place, the polling place that is closest to work, school, your kids' daycare. You can vote in person. You can choose to be on the permanent or early voting list. We have all of these different options, and we should be talking about ways to increase those options to vote. If we consolidate elections, then we lose some of those options. And get this, the largest political party there is in the city of Phoenix today is the Independent Party. We would be forcing independents to take one extra step. They would actually have to request a ballot. We have to ask independents to request a Republican ballot or a Democrat ballot. If you are an independent, or if your neighbor or family member is an independent, ask them why they became an independent. Do you think they really want to ask for a Republican or Democrat ballot? We could do better than that. We are a nonpartisan city. We should remain a nonpartisan city. So I'm glad you spoke up, but I'm looking in this room, and believe it or not, this is one of the larger crowds when it comes to talking about consolidated elections in this city. Yeah, exactly. We look around, it's not very large. And this issue will be heard next week at the council meeting. So have a conversation with your neighbors and with your friends. We can't afford to move toward partisanship. Partisanship is, if you look at our country, has gotten us yet one more government shutdown at the federal level. We don't need that in local government. These are real issues that we have to solve. We have to truly figure out a way to make Maryvale a safer community, South Phoenix a safer community. We have to find a way to attract high-wage jobs into this city, make our schools safer. There's so many things that we have to continue to work on, and I have to tell you, if you really want to work on these issues, as far as I'm concerned, we have to extract the politics out of these issues, see them for what they are, to solve them. We should not be talking about making it a more political process, a more partisan process. So thank you for speaking up. Please use social media, make phone calls. I personally have sent out several emails on this. I've made phone calls. I've had conversations. In fact, if you look at the meeting minutes of the city council meetings, it was conversations that I've had. Laura Pastor is another that has worked hard to get us to this point, that have asked for public meetings, and here we are. We're having public meetings, and unfortunately, not a whole lot of participation. But it's not going to stop this item from being on the agenda next week. So we have to talk to our friends, talk to our neighbors, come out, have this discussion, because this is incredibly important of how we do business here in the city of Phoenix moving forward. So again, thank you. I want to thank our city staff for coming out. Chris, thank you for coming out. It is 5:53, so we will, in this particular meeting, our budget hearing will take place in 7 minutes at 6 o'clock. It will be it's a citywide bilingual budget hearing. And again, thank you for coming out, and God bless.